It was the 4th of July. While most people were celebrating, two men were digging through scrap metal in a quiet corner of Yakima County. That is when they found it. An abandoned freezer sitting alone. Inside were human remains. For 9 months, a family had been searching for a missing mother of 4, holding on to hope that she might still come home. But what they did not know was that the truth had been hidden in plain sight. And even more disturbing, the people who knew what happened never said a word. The discovery inside that freezer would unravel one of the most disturbing cases in Washington state. The victim was 31-year-old Rosenda Strong, a mother of 4, a sister, a daughter, and a woman deeply connected to her community. She was a member of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation and a descendant of the Yakima Nation. In October 2018, Rosenda vanished after leaving the Legends Casino in Toppenish. At first, it was a missing person case. Her family searched relentlessly, putting up flyers, organizing gatherings, and refusing to let her name fade. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, hope slowly began to slip away. Then 9 months later came the horrifying discovery. Rosenda had not just disappeared. She had been murdered, her body hidden inside a freezer and dumped like garbage. What shocked investigators even more was what came next. This was not the act of one person. Multiple people were there. Multiple people knew. And not a single one came forward. What really happened in those final moments of Rosenda Strong's life and how so many people stayed silent is what makes this case so chilling. Because the truth was far darker than anyone expected. Rosenda Strong was 31 years old. She was a mother of 4, and to the people who loved her, that is what mattered most. A sister, a daughter, an aunt, and a friend. She was a citizen of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation and a descendant of the Yakima Nation, deeply rooted in her culture and community. To her family, Rosenda was not just a name in a headline. She was someone who laughed loudly, who showed love openly, and who made sure the people around her felt seen. Her sister, Sissy Strong Reese, would later hold on to one final memory. The last time she saw Rosenda, she told her she loved her and promised she would be back. She never was. In early October 2018, Rosenda was staying at her sister's home in Wapato, Washington, a small community on the Yakima Reservation in Yakima County. It is a place where people know each other, where families are closely connected, and where news travels fast. But it is also a place that has quietly faced a growing crisis. For years, indigenous women in this region have gone missing, been found murdered, or died under unclear and often unexplained circumstances. Cases that do not always get national attention and cases that families are often left to fight for on their own. On October 2nd, 2018, Rosenda left her sister's house with a friend. They were heading to Legends Casino in Toppenish, about a short drive away. It was a normal outing. Nothing about that night seemed unusual. Nothing that would suggest it would be the last time her family would ever see her alive. After that, Rosenda disappeared. There were no calls, no messages, and no explanation. At first there was confusion, then worry, and then fear. Her family did not wait. They started searching immediately, putting up flyers across the area, sharing her photo online, organizing gatherings, and refusing to let her vanish without a trace. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Still, there was nothing. Behind the scenes, law enforcement began investigating, following leads, chasing rumors, and searching locations across the reservation. But for Rosenda's family, the the silence was unbearable, because not knowing can be worse than the truth. And all the while, unknown to them, the answers were already out there, hidden, protected, and kept quiet by people who knew exactly what had happened in the days after Rosenda Strong disappeared. The truth was already unfolding behind closed doors, but no one outside that circle knew. What investigators would later piece together reveals a chain of events that began just days after she was last seen. On or around October 5, 2018, Rosenda was at a house outside Wapato on the Yakima Reservation. The home had a reputation. It was known by some as the House of Souls, a rundown place where people came and went, where drug use was common, and where tensions could rise quickly. That night, Rosenda was there with several others. Among them was a woman named Jidida Ayesha Moreno. At some point, an argument broke out between the two. Exactly what sparked it remains unclear. But what happened next would change everything. According to investigators, the argument escalated, and then Moreno pulled a gun. Rosenda Strong, unarmed, had no chance. She was shot behind the residence. Just like that, in a moment of violence, her life was taken. But the crime did not end there, because Rosenda was not alone. There were other people at that house, people who saw what happened or arrived moments after. And instead of calling for help or reporting the shooting, they made a different choice. They helped cover it up. According to federal prosecutors, Moreno asked for help getting rid of the body, and several people agreed. Rosenda's body was laid out, and a tarp was placed over her. Then, in a chilling and calculated step, her remains were placed inside an old freezer. A decision that would keep her hidden for months. The freezer was then loaded onto the back of a truck. Heavy, awkward, and impossible to ignore. And yet, it was moved anyway. It was driven away from the house, away from the scene of the crime, toward Toppenish, about 10 miles from Wapato, near a towing company in an area where abandoned items might not immediately raise suspicion. That is where they left her, inside that freezer, discarded like something meant to be forgotten. And then they walked away. In the days that followed, life continued. No one reported the murder. No one came forward, and no one told Rosenda's family what had happened. Instead, they stayed silent. Investigators would later say that not a single person involved showed the courage or compassion to tell the truth. While Rosenda's loved ones searched desperately for answers, the people who knew said nothing, and the silence did not just last days. It lasted months. But what makes this case even more unsettling is that the violence did not stop with Rosenda. Just 2 days after her death, Jidida Ayesha Moreno, the woman accused of pulling the trigger, was killed. Her body was later found on November 28, 2018, in a closed-off area of the reservation. Now there were 2 dead, 1 missing, and 1 discovered, and still no clear answers. Whatever had happened inside that house, and whatever tensions or conflicts existed, had spiraled into something far more dangerous than anyone could have expected. And yet the full truth remained buried, hidden in that freezer, waiting to be discovered. For 9 long months, Rosenda Strong's family searched, hoped, and feared the worst, not knowing that the answer was sitting out in the open just miles away. For months, there was nothing but silence. There were no confirmed sightings, no clear leads, and no answers. But behind the scenes, investigators were not standing still. From the very beginning, Rosenda Strong's disappearance was taken seriously. The FBI joined forces with Yakima Nation Tribal Police, launching a wide and relentless search across the reservation and surrounding areas. Agents followed up on every lead, every rumor, and every tip, no matter how small. They searched remote land, revisited locations, and in some cases, even dug into the ground, hoping to find any trace of Rosenda. But time kept passing, and still nothing. For Rosenda's family, those months were unbearable. They held on to hope, but deep down they feared the truth. Then, Everything changed on July 4th, 2019. Nearly 9 months after Rosenda vanished, two men searching for scrap metal in Yakima County came across something unusual, an abandoned freezer. It was unplugged, sitting out in the open near Toppenish. At first glance, it looked like junk, but when they opened it, they made a horrifying discovery. Inside were human remains. Authorities were immediately called, and the scene quickly filled with investigators. Yakima County Sheriff's deputies, Yakima Nation Tribal Police, and the FBI. The remains were later identified using dental records. It was Rosenda Strong. Just like that, the case shifted from missing person to confirmed homicide. For her family, the worst fears had become reality. But for investigators, this was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. Now they knew where she had been. The question was who put her there and why. With the discovery of the freezer, the investigation intensified. Agents began retracing Rosenda's final days, narrowing in on the people she had been with before she disappeared. Slowly, a clearer picture began to form. They identified a house outside Wapato, a place known locally as the House of Souls, a location already associated with drug activity and people moving in and out. It became a central focus. Investigators uncovered that Rosenda had been there around October 5, 2018, and she was not alone. There were multiple individuals present that night. People who had seen what happened or knew more than they were saying. As investigators pressed further, the silence began to crack. Through interviews, evidence, and continued pressure, authorities uncovered what had taken place behind that house. Rosenda had been shot during an argument with Jidida Iyesha Marino. But what shocked investigators even more was what happened afterward. Instead of reporting the crime, multiple individuals helped conceal it. The freezer, the tarp, the transport, none of it was random. It required coordination, effort, and decision-making, and that meant more people were involved. By June 2023, nearly 5 years after Rosenda's death, federal authorities brought charges against 7 men connected to the case, not for committing the murder itself, but for what they did after. They were charged as accessories after the fact for helping cover it up. Among them were Michael Lee Moody, Joshua Max Estrada, Jamal Antwan Pimps, Andrew Norris Zach, Ural Ballanton Badillo, Kevin Todd Brem, and Wilson Louis Hunt, each accused of playing a role in hiding what happened. Investigators determined that several of them helped move Rosenda's body, placing it into the freezer and transporting it to the dumping site near Toppenish, while others were present and aware of the killing but chose to stay silent. One detail stood out. Not a single person involved tried to get Rosenda help after she was shot. Not one call to emergency services, and not one attempt to save her. Instead, they focused on covering it up. Prosecutors would later say that the people involved acted in fear and under the influence of drugs. But regardless of the circumstances, the result was the same. A young mother lost her life, and her family was left searching for nearly a year without answers. As the case moved forward, one by one, the suspects began to plead guilty. Michael Lee Moody was among the first to be sentenced, receiving more than 7 years in federal prison for his role. Others followed with sentences ranging from just over 2 years to more than 8 years. Each plea and each sentence slowly filled in the gaps of what happened. But one name stood apart: Wilson Louis Hunt. He was the only defendant who had not reached a plea agreement early on, the last to hold out and the last piece of the puzzle. Investigators accused him of helping dump the freezer, the very act that kept Rosenda hidden for months. For years, the case had been clouded by silence, but now with arrests, confessions, and mounting evidence, the truth was finally coming into focus. Still, there were questions that lingered. Why did no one speak up sooner? What really happened inside that house in those final moments? And how did so many people stay silent for so long, just when investigators thought they were beginning to understand the case? It took another dark turn, because Rosenda Strong was not the only one who died. Only 2 days after Rosenda was killed, the woman accused of shooting her, Rosenda Strong was also dead. Her body was discovered weeks later on November 28, 2018, in a closed portion of the Yakima Reservation. Now the case had shifted again. The one person who could have fully explained what happened was gone permanently. It raised more questions than answers. Was her death connected to Rosenda's murder? Was it retaliation? Or something else entirely? Investigators were left to piece together the truth without the central figure in the crime, and that made everything more complicated, because now the only people who knew what happened inside that house were the ones who had already chosen to stay silent. As the investigation continued, another unsettling reality began to emerge. This was not a single bad decision made in panic. It was a chain of decisions, layered and deliberate. After the shooting, multiple people did not just witness what happened. They participated in what came next, moving the body, hiding it, dumping it, then walking away and continuing their lives. For months, nothing surfaced. No confessions and no tips that broke the case open. Meanwhile, Rosenda's family was living a completely different reality. They were searching, hoping, and holding on to the belief that she might still be alive. Behind the scenes, investigators were chasing leads that often went nowhere. Rumors spread, stories changed, and people talked, but not always truthfully. In cases like this, where drugs, fear, and multiple witnesses are involved, the truth can become distorted, harder to pin down and harder to prove. Then came the discovery of the freezer, a moment that should have brought immediate clarity, but instead, it deepened the horror, because it confirmed something investigators had begun to suspect, that someone had gone to great lengths to make sure Rosenda would not be found. And even after that discovery, it still took years to fully unravel who was involved. 7 people were eventually charged, not for pulling the trigger, but for what they did afterward. That alone shocked many, because it meant this was not just about one act of violence. It was about a collective silence, a group of people who all made the same choice to say nothing. And perhaps one of the most disturbing developments of all was how long it took for the truth to come together. Nearly 5 years passed before federal indictments were handed down in 2023. 5 years of waiting, 5 years of grief, and 5 years of unanswered questions. For Rosenda's family, every delay, every court date, and every development reopened the wound. But as the case slowly moved forward, one thing became clear. This was not just a murder investigation. It was a story about silence, about fear, and about what happens when the truth is buried not just in the ground, but in the choices people make to hide it. In the end, the truth was not hidden in some complex mystery. It was hidden in silence. What happened to Rosenda Strong was as brutal as it was simple. On or around October 5, 2018, inside a rundown house on the Yakima Reservation, an argument turned deadly. Rosenda Strong pulled a gun and shot Rosenda, an unarmed mother of 4 killed in an instant. But what followed is what makes this case so haunting, because Rosenda did not just lose her life that night. She was denied dignity in death. Instead of calling for help or facing what had just happened, the people in that house made a choice. They covered it up. They wrapped her body in a tarp, placed her inside a freezer, loaded her onto a truck, and drove her away like she did not matter. While her family searched, begged for answers, and held on to hope, the people responsible for hiding the truth stayed silent. Not one of them came forward, and not one of them told her family where she was. And the person who pulled the trigger never faced justice in court, because just 2 days later she was killed in the end. There was no single moment where everything was revealed, and no dramatic confession. Just years of investigation piecing together fragments until the full picture came into focus. Rosenda Strong was murdered, and then she was hidden, not by one person, but by many. And that is the truth that makes this case impossible to forget. For Rosenda Strong's family, justice did not come all at once. It came slowly, piece by piece, court date by court date, and sentence by sentence. Years after she disappeared, the truth finally surfaced. The people who helped hide what happened were held accountable. Some sentenced to years in federal prison, others still awaiting their fate. And the last to hold out eventually pleaded guilty, bringing one of the final chapters of this case to a close. But even with convictions and even with answers, there are things that justice cannot restore. 9 months is how long Rosenda's family searched for her, not knowing where she was or what had happened. 9 months of hope, of fear, and of living in the unknown. And that kind of pain does not just disappear. Her sister never stopped showing up, never stopped speaking her name, and never stopped fighting for the truth. Because for families like hers, closure is not about forgetting. It is about being able to breathe again without the weight of unanswered questions. Rosenda Strong's story is not just about what happened inside that house. It is about what happened after. The silence, the choices, and the time it took for anyone to speak. And it reflects a larger reality, one that continues far beyond this single case. Too many Indigenous women go missing. Too many are found too late. And too many families are left searching long after the world has moved on. Rosenda was not just a victim. She was a mother, a sister, a life that mattered, and a name that will not be forgotten. Because even after everything, her story was found, and it was finally heard.